I woke up in a haze, the kind that makes your head feel too heavy to lift, your limbs trembling as if they belonged to someone else. The fluorescent lights above flickered softly, a rhythm that made the whole room feel alive, almost mocking me. "Donde están?" I whispered under my breath, barely audible even to myself. My throat was dry, my mouth tasted like rust and forgotten memories. I blinked slowly, trying to remember where I was, why I felt this unbearable weight pressing on my chest, and then it all came rushing back. The hospital, the monitors, the lonely white walls. The bed felt too big, too cold. The sheets stiff under my fingers as I tried to adjust myself, trying to make the space feel less empty. But nothing helped. The room seemed to stretch endlessly, a cage made of sterile walls and quiet hums. "¿Por qué nadie está aquí conmigo?" I thought, the words echoing off the walls, bouncing back at me like they were meant to be a punishment. My parents, my brother, they were gone, just like that. Vanished into some sunlit world I had no part of, leaving me to stare at the ceiling as my heart thudded against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I tried to focus on the machines, the rhythmic beep of the heart monitor, the soft hiss of oxygen through a tube, the occasional scrape of a nurse's cart in the hallway. They were supposed to be comforting, lifelines, but they felt like reminders instead. Reminders that life outside was moving without me, that I had been left behind. I swallowed hard and pressed my hand against the cold metal railing of the bed, trying to ground myself. Todo el mundo está allí afuera, y yo estoy atrapado aquí. It was then that I heard it, a faint creak from the corner of the room. My eyes snapped toward the sound, straining to make out any shape, any movement. My body froze. ¿Quién está allí? The words almost left my lips, but fear clamped my tongue. I felt my chest tighten, the familiar panic of helplessness flooding every nerve. I wanted to call for help, but my voice was gone, swallowed by the air itself. Only the beeping continued, insistent, indifferent. I pulled the blanket closer, the rough fabric scratching against my arms. The room felt colder than it had a second ago, the shadows in the corners darkening as though they were breathing. Every tiny sound became amplified, the distant footsteps of the night nurse, the faint rustle of a curtain in another room. No estoy solo, I realized, though I couldn't say how I knew. My eyes darted, searching, willing something to appear, some rational explanation to stop the fear from eating me alive. But the room stayed still, silent except for the machines, except for the quiet pulse of my own racing heart. Hours passed in a blur. I counted them in whispers and shallow breaths, the tension coiling tighter in my chest with every minute. I tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that the creaks, the whispers, the shadows were just tricks of my mind. But every night, they returned. A hand brushing against the edge of the blanket, too deliberate to be accidental. Footsteps that didn't belong to anyone who should have been there. Eyes, maybe, just glimpses in the corner of my vision, fleeting, watching. Algo o alguien está aquí y no puedo escapar. I wanted to cry, but tears felt heavy, like they would drown me before I even had the chance to scream. I pressed my face into the pillow, the smell of antiseptic filling my nostrils, my own sobs muffled against the cold fabric. My phone, left on the bedside table, vibrated with messages from my brother, sunny beach selfies, laughter frozen in pixels, proof that the world outside had continued without me. Every notification was a knife twisting in my chest. ¿Por qué ellos están allá y yo estoy aquí? The question looped endlessly, impossible to answer, impossible to silence. At some point, I stopped trying to rationalize. I stopped trying to understand. I only existed in the present, the sharp chill of the night air brushing against my skin, the flicker of lights above, the constant small movements that told me someone was near. I learned to listen to the silence between the sounds, to notice the rhythm of the room as it shifted with each tiny intrusion. No puedo dormir, no puedo respirar, no puedo dejar de mirar. Every shadow could hide a threat, every corner could conceal eyes. My hospital room became a labyrinth of fear, and I had no map. Even when the sun began to rise, washing the walls in weak golden light, the fear lingered. I clung to the memory of the night, of the sensation of not knowing who had been there, of not knowing what they wanted. The hospital staff came and went, their cheerful faces and polite reassurances only highlighting my isolation. The world outside seemed normal, impossible, untouched, and I stayed, suspended in time, waiting, wondering, haunted by the unknown presence that visited me every night. ¿Quién viene por mí cada noche? The question would not leave me. Days blurred together in the pale hospital light. Every morning I woke up, half expecting my parents to burst through the door with apologies, smiles, stories of sunny beaches and warm hotel rooms, but they never came. Only the nurses, polite but distant, shuffling in and out like ghosts, checking my vitals, adjusting the IV, nodding as if my absence of family didn't matter. ¿Por qué me dejaron así? The question echoed in my mind, relentless, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I learned quickly how to exist in the space between moments. Between the beeping of monitors, the creak of wheelchair wheels in the hallway, the soft murmur of visitors passing by other rooms. I memorized the rhythms of the hospital, the timing of footsteps, the subtle patterns that told me when someone might approach my room. But still, the nights were the worst. When the fluorescent lights dimmed, the world shrank to my bed and the shadows that clung to its edges. No estoy solo, y no sé quién viene. Meals arrived in small trays, untouched most of the time, the food cold before I could even lift a fork. My brother, somewhere far away, probably laughing, probably swimming in water that glistened under the sun, became a ghost of memory. Photos on my phone reminded me constantly. Him grinning, my parents holding cocktails, their arms wrapped around him in a way they never did for me during those days. Miranme desde la distancia. The bitterness of it seeped into my bones, turning fear into a hollow ache that no medicine could touch. I started talking to the shadows, whispering into the dark corners of the room. ¿Por qué? I would ask, voice trembling, almost daring whatever, or whoever was there to answer. Sometimes I imagined them speaking back, a voice I couldn't quite recognize, telling me secrets I wasn't ready to hear. I clutched the edges of the blanket as if it were a lifeline, a thin thread connecting me to reality, to the world I had been forcibly separated from. Every creak, every shuffle in the night became a question I could not ignore. I remember one afternoon, the sun slanting through the blinds, throwing stripes across the floor. I tried to write a note to my parents, to tell them how it felt to be left behind, but my hands shook too violently. Pen scratched unevenly across paper, letters looping into themselves, forming shapes that made no sense. ¿Lo entenderían si pudieran leerlo? I doubted it. I doubted everything. The hospital had become a world where normal rules didn't apply, where time stretched, and the people who were supposed to protect me had vanished into another life, leaving only the echoes of their laughter and the smell of sunscreen in my memory. And then there were the nurses who occasionally lingered, asking questions too soft, too casual. "Are you comfortable?" they'd say, with a smile that didn't reach their eyes. I wanted to tell them I wasn't, that I hadn't been comfortable in weeks, that the bed felt like a prison and the ceiling like it was closing in on me, but words were heavy, trapped behind the walls of my fear. ¿Podrían ellos siquiera entender? I became hyper-aware of every detail in my room. The slight tilt of the chair, the way the curtain sometimes moved even when there was no draft, the faint scent of perfume that lingered in the air long after visitors had passed. Each small anomaly made me question my own mind. Was I imagining it? Was someone really there, watching, moving quietly while the world outside continued in blissful ignorance? No puedo ignorarlo. Algo está aquí. I tried to sleep. I really did. But the shadows refused to let me rest. My eyelids would close, and the sensation would return. The brush of a hand against the blanket, the faint rustle near the foot of the bed, the soft, almost inaudible whisper of a name I couldn't recognize. Panic would rise like a tide, and I'd bolt upright, drenched in sweat, heart hammering, lungs burning. No puedo escapar de esto. Days became a trial of endurance. I spoke less, tried to conserve energy, tried to be invisible, but invisibility was impossible. The presence I could feel, though unseen, was relentless, and it made the air feel heavy, thick with a tension that never lifted. I wanted to scream, but the walls were too solid, my voice too weak. ¿Quién viene cada noche? ¿Y por qué yo? The question swirled, a storm inside my chest, with no answer and no relief. Even when the sunlight returned, painting the walls gold, the fear lingered, unshakable. I became attuned to every little thing, the subtle click of a doorknob, the shuffle of slippers in the hallway, the shift of a shadow under the glow of the monitor. My mind, exhausted and raw, clung to these details, desperately seeking control in a situation where none existed. I was trapped, suspended in a delicate balance between terror and the slow, creeping realization that no one would rescue me. And still, through it all, a part of me held on to hope. The hope that one day, someone, my parents, my brother, anyone, would come and break the unbearable silence, would lift me from the monotony of fear and loneliness, and that I might finally understand why I had been left behind. But that hope was fragile, fleeting, a whisper I barely allowed myself to hear. Realmente vendrán? The nights became unbearable. The shadows stretched longer, darker, as if they were alive, pulsing with intent. My body ached from lying in the hospital bed, from the restless nights spent straining to hear every whisper, every creak, every movement. ¿Quién está aquí? I whispered into the darkness, my voice trembling so much I could barely hear it. I wanted answers. I needed them, but all I got was silence and the subtle, undeniable proof that someone was watching. It started with small things. A book moved slightly on the bedside table, though no one had been near it. The blanket, twisted in ways I hadn't left it, as if some invisible hand had rearranged it while I slept. I tried to convince myself it was the nurses, the cleaning staff, the wind from the window. But deep down, I knew. No era eso. No podía ser eso. Every creak, every shift in the room, every faint scent of perfume that lingered too long told me that someone, or something, was there, quietly, deliberately. I remember one night, vividly. The room was dark, save for the soft green glow of the heart monitor, painting stripes across my sheets. I felt a presence at the edge of the bed before I saw anything. The hairs on my arms stood on end. The air grew heavier, thick, almost suffocating. I wanted to call out, but my voice refused to come. ¿Quién eres? ¿Qué quieres de mí? I asked in a whisper, but it was swallowed by the walls, by the darkness, by the fear that had become my constant companion. The footsteps came, soft and measured, careful not to alert anyone else. I could hear them, pacing just beyond my vision, and every instinct screamed at me to flee, to hide under the sheets, to make myself small enough to disappear. But there was nowhere to hide. The bed, the monitors, the walls, all were traps. I lay frozen, staring at the ceiling, counting every second as though time itself could keep me safe. Algo o alguien está aquí, y no puedo escapar. I started noticing patterns. The presence came at the same time each night, always after the hospital hallways had fallen silent, always when the world outside was dreaming, unaware of what was happening inside my little room. I tried to leave the light on, tried to call for help, but it was as if the very existence of the room shifted in those hours, folding in on itself, bending reality around me. Shadows moved differently. Whispers crept into the corners of my mind, and the air carried a weight that nothing else could explain. No estoy imaginando esto. Some nights, I caught glimpses. A silhouette near the door, just for a second. A shadow in the corner of the room, moving with precision and intent. Eyes. I thought I saw eyes, glinting in the faint light, watching me, judging me, waiting for something I didn't understand. My heart raced. My chest burned, my body trembled. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't escape the invisible chains that held me in place. ¿Quién viene por mí cada noche? I started documenting it, writing in a notebook whenever I could. The times, the sounds, the patterns, every small detail. I hoped someone, maybe a nurse, maybe even my parents, would read it and understand. But deep down, I knew they wouldn't. No one would believe what I was experiencing, and that realization, that crushing truth, made the nights even longer, even colder, even more suffocating. Estoy solo, y nadie va a ayudarme. Sometimes I imagined speaking to the figure, imagining it responding, a voice soft and intimate, sharing secrets I wasn't ready to hear. I wanted it to go away, but part of me was desperate to understand. The fear had twisted into curiosity, a dangerous need to know the reason behind the presence. Who had come every night while my parents laughed under the sun with my brother? ¿Por qué ellos están allá y yo estoy aquí, atrapado? The tension escalated until it became unbearable. Every creak, every shuffle, every faint movement set my nerves alight. Sleep became impossible. The walls seemed to press closer, the shadows deepened, and every small sound, once mundane, became a warning. My eyes would dart across the room, following every shifting shadow, counting every breath, every step. No puedo ignorarlo. Algo está aquí, y lo sé. One night, I finally mustered the courage to confront it, or at least, to try. I sat up in bed, shaking, hands gripping the blanket, eyes scanning the darkness. ¿Quién eres? Muéstrate. My voice cracked, high and raw. The silence that followed was deafening, but the room felt different. The air shifted, as if acknowledging my challenge, as if the presence had been waiting for me to speak. The tension was electric, unbearable, every second stretched into eternity. And then, for just a moment, I saw it. Not clearly, but enough. A figure, just at the edge of my vision, framed by the dim light of the monitor. The outline was human, familiar, yet impossible to place. I blinked, and it was gone, but the certainty remained. Someone had been here. Someone had been watching me all along. No estoy loco. No estoy solo. Alguien viene cada noche. That night changed everything. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was a promise, a warning, a revelation. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't safe. And I couldn't ignore it, because the next night, and the night after, it would return. Y yo debía estar preparado. I had been waiting for this moment without even knowing it. Nights of fear, endless shadows, whispers that clung to the edges of my mind. They had all led here. The air in the hospital room felt heavier than ever, thick with the anticipation I couldn't shake. Ha llegado el momento, I whispered, barely daring to breathe. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint hum of the monitors, every rustle in the corner seemed amplified, as if the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for the confrontation I had tried to avoid but could no longer escape. The footsteps came first, soft, deliberate, familiar. My heart began to hammer violently against my ribs, a warning and a plea at the same time. I had seen the patterns, traced the visits, counted the shadows, but nothing had prepared me for this. ¿Quién eres? ¿Qué quieres de mí? I shouted, my voice breaking under the weight of weeks of terror and isolation. The silence that followed was almost worse than the presence itself. My chest burned with anger and fear, my hands shaking as I gripped the bed rail. And then, finally, a figure emerged from the corner of the room, not hidden in shadow, not just a glimpse, but fully present, fully human. I froze. My mind raced. Familiarity struck like a lightning bolt, and then disbelief, then rage. My parents. Not my father, not my mother separately, but together, standing there with a casualness that made my stomach twist. They had returned, yes, but not for comfort. Not yet. ¿Qué hacen aquí después de todo esto? I wanted to scream, to throw the words like daggers, but the sound caught in my throat. My brother appeared behind them, laughing, holding souvenirs, full of sunlight and carefree smiles that felt like knives. My chest tightened. ¿Cómo pudieron? I thought, the words unspoken but burning in my mind. The absence, the vacations, the choices they had made while I lay alone in a sterile room, they were all undeniable now, standing in front of me, tangible, unavoidable. I couldn't control the flood of emotions anymore. Anger, fear, betrayal, confusion, all of it collided at once. I stood, shaky, facing them, tears streaming down my cheeks. How could you leave me? I finally managed to shout, my voice raw, breaking through the quiet that had always been my companion. "How could you go to Cancun with him, laughing, living, while I was here? Like I didn't matter." The words hung in the air, heavy, almost suffocating. My mother's face fell, her smile faltering, eyes wide with something I couldn't read. Guilt, shock, denial. My father opened his mouth, then closed it, as if unsure how to answer the torrent of emotions spilling from me. My brother looked at me, confused, innocent perhaps, but also complicit simply by being there, by existing in that carefree world I had been barred from. "Lo entienden ahora?" I thought, the question sharp, almost like a physical weight pressing into the room. The presence I had felt for weeks, the nightly intrusions, the shadows, the subtle touches, the whispers, began to make sense in a horrifying, awful way. It hadn't been a stranger. It hadn't been random. It had been their absence manifesting, a constant reminder of the choice they had made. And now, with them here, the tension, the fear, the isolation, it all converged in a moment of raw exposure. Todo lo que sentí, todo lo que pasé, lo ven ahora. I wanted them to see me, to understand the nights I had endured, the helplessness, the terror, the quiet despair that had wrapped around me like chains. I wanted them to feel it, to acknowledge it. Do you know what it's like to wait, to be alone, to hear someone or something coming every night, not knowing if you're safe? I demanded, voice shaking, fists gripping the blankets. Do you know how it feels to realize that you were invisible to the people who were supposed to protect you? My mother's eyes finally softened, a flicker of realization, of regret perhaps. My father's jaw tightened, silent acknowledgement of the wrong, though words failed him. And in that charged silence, something shifted. The fear, the tension, the long nights of invisible torment, they all became tangible between us. Ya no puedo seguir callando. Ya no. I didn't forgive them. Not yet. But I spoke. I released weeks of silence, weeks of bottled-up terror and heartbreak into the air between us. I described every shadow, every whisper, every moment of isolation, letting the truth of my nights hit them, hit the room, hit me. The confrontation was messy, raw, emotional, painful, but necessary. Tienen que saber, tienen que entender. My brother didn't know how to respond. He didn't understand the gravity of what I had endured. But I didn't need him to. I only needed to be seen, to be heard, to finally claim the space they had denied me. The hospital room, once a cage, now became a stage for truth, for exposure, for the first time in weeks, control. And as they stood there, listening, forced to confront the consequences of their choices, I felt a shift within myself. I was no longer just a frightened figure in a hospital bed. I was a witness to my own story, a voice finally raised against absence and betrayal. Puedo respirar, puedo hablar, puedo existir. The confrontation didn't fix everything. It didn't erase the nights, the fear, or the isolation. But it made one thing clear. I had survived, I had endured, and I would not remain silent anymore. They had to face the truth of what their choices had caused. And finally, I had reclaimed my voice.